Hello, everyone, and welcome to Maker Chat Show and Tell. My name's Adam Creature, and we're about to start the show. And today we have the one and only Chaz Vance on. Welcome to the show, Chaz.
How's it going?
Good. Chaz is going to be showing us a lot of really cool stuff because Chaz is actually, what at least to me, he is an expert in mechanisms in a lot of ways, in a lot of like kind of an animatronic type of way, but also that translates perfectly to doing more practical type of effects as well. Would you say?
Yeah, I had a unique upbringing, which started me early. So by the time I got into this, I had already messed around so much with mechanical stuff. So.
Oh yeah, he grew up on a farm, which you wouldn't. Well, I guess you could guess that based on his attire today. But you might know him more from the Creature Shop Challenge show. He was a contestant on that, and that's actually where we met in the earlier stage. Obviously, I wasn't on the show, but in the earlier stages of that, we actually met, and then we found out later that we both live in the same area, which is how we were able to connect and collaborate on so many projects. But, you know, the title of the show is, of course, the show and tell. So I wanted to start off just by showing a bunch of different things that we've kind of made before we start to get too much into the process of building mechs and how you really start to think through them, which is kind of what I want the overall focus to be. But I just kind of want to get people have a little bit of visual eye candy of some different things. Do you have anything off the bat, or do you want me to start off with something?
Go ahead. I think that generally our audience is going to be people that, you know, follow you and you work more in their arena. So why don't we look at something that you've got to start with?
Sure, we can do that too. And hopefully on Rewatch people will, because this is also streaming live on Chaz's YouTube channel as well. We have our own side little podcast that we do as well called Maker Art DIY, which has been fun. We have one other episode and we're going to be doing more soon. But we thought we'd collaborate on this type of episode. But actually, there's one that I was doing very recently, just this, actually 2 nights ago I did. If you saw it on my Instagram at Adam Krutinger, you saw that I was building this type of little mechanized puppet here. It's very simple as far as how compared to how complex animatronics and mechanisms can get. But I started off with this very simple sketch. This is going to be like a little bird puppet. So what I wanted was a little tiny beak. You can probably see it better behind the paper here. The little beak moves, and then the wings are going to flap just like that. So again, pretty simple of a little thing like that. But of course, if you've been following my Instagram and other things too in this page, you'll know that one of the main projects I've been working on that's been kind of sleepy for the last couple days is, of course, this Baby Yoda project that I'm working on, which he can look up. He has a mechanism to look up. He's got an eye blink mechanism, of course, a mouth mechanism,
of course,
as well as the ears that go as well. And I have a quick little clip of what the guts look like on this guy, which I'll play. So that's kind of what is going on inside this guy. As you can see, I'm kind of using, for the most part, things that are kind of around the house or warehouse. His plate of his head is wood, and the housing of the head is PVC. And that's even though I do have some other specialty type materials that I use, I try to kind of use things that are pretty accessible to me. But with that said, I wanted to get more into the process of doing this type of stuff, which is why I wanted Chaz on, because I'm what Chaz would call a novice, as a
novice,
you're right, of building these type of things, because the way I do it is very makery. You know, it's not necessarily because actually, why don't we start here? What is your formal education that you've had?
I went to school for entertainment design. When I went, it was called special effects, and by the time I graduated, it was called entertainment design. It was a facet of industrial design. So we had, you know, friends and people in the same area of the school using the same facilities and taking some of the same classes that we're doing product design, transportation design, fashion, and a couple others that are sort of fringe, you know, associated in there as well.
What was your formal degree title?
Industrial design for entertainment.
Okay, industrial design. Is that what it's still called now if someone wants to get into it?
I went to the Art Institute, and the Art Institute has had a lot of trouble defending the fact that they were a private institution that didn't turn anybody away and took everyone's tuition. So as somebody who likes to think of themselves as talented, and the people that I knew and that were in the program with me all were very talented, we got everything that we needed out of it. Anyway, yes, industrial design and entertainment design. There are also a bunch of great certification courses that you can do either remotely or on a campus, you know, at a facility, most of which are a year or two. And you could start sweeping the floor at a place too if you live somewhere near, you know, where you don't have to move your life to start sweeping the floor somewhere. If there's somebody nearby that'll teach you, you can do that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. You know, and it says a lot about the way you work with like almost all of your projects, whereas the way a lot of people would even tackle something like home repair, like they would just kind of go to the Home Depot, grab some lumber and stuff and just start, you know, making things look nicer. Whereas Chaz, a lot of times he's very meticulous in the way that he plans things out. You can see this is a quick sketch that he did for a floor plan of some sort of house.
That was a renovation from last year.
That's right, a renovation that he's working on. Okay, so even with projects like that, you know, you have a very, very much of a process that you go about doing things, which is really great, and especially great for designs of mechanical design like this, for like mechs for puppets. And one more thing I just wanted to throw up too is this is another design that you did for a trailer. Is that correct? Trailer?
That's a vintage camper. A friend and I just remodeled or dressed up an older camper, and that was the plan. But yeah, there has to be a plan. You know.
Yeah. But then again, at this point, people will be wondering, like, but like, wait, aren't you supposed to be talking about puppets and mechanisms? Again, that's just kind of show you the type of process that he does. So even though he has that, you know, very right side of the brain for as far as planning and stuff, also the very creative left side of the brain, which is like, here are some very old sketches of your creature designs that you've done for things in the past. And one of my favorite projects of yours that I'm familiar with is your Minotaur project there. That's kind of the finished one there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well, because I have a bunch of behind the scenes pictures of so that's kind of the Minotaur kind of
yeah, this is like more than 10 years ago, so it's hard to look at early work. I think we all know how that feels, but yeah, it was a big project, and it's the type of project that I got suckered into again despite my best efforts. And I'll tell everybody now, it's suffered. I can see now from being not having enough budget or enough time. We knew better than some of the things that we did there, but yeah, we got that one out the door, and I'm proud of it in context of it being one of the first things that we did, and one of the cheapest things that we've ever done with the biggest scope and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. And then that being said, to a lot of people that are probably watching this, they are probably more like homemakers, so they would look at this, especially stuff on the inside, as far as some of the servos that you have in there. This was not I don't want to undersell this project as much.
Well, it depends, and I think that you are voicing the way that a lot of people feel when they look at the final product or the middle of it. If you don't have any idea what's going on, boy, an engine or anything else like that looks incredibly complicated, because you haven't got any linear understanding. You don't understand where you would begin. You don't understand what portion of the middle that you're looking at. And by the time it's finished, everything that gets to that point looks so good because you've solved all the problems along the way. It doesn't look like a pile of all the failures and things that didn't quite work, and it's just the stuff that worked, and it looks so good. But that's what I think scares a lot of people away from mechanical design, is the whole process is hiding out in my hard drive as hundreds of photographs that I pull 10 or 20 out of at the end that show this beautiful process where I was just putting that hole in that piece that ended up in the final one. And like, you don't see any of the other pieces that I drew or made. So it is scary. And so what I wanted to talk about today is how to understand that process so that it's nowhere near as scary. And you can use the process on a very simple project, and it'll always work for you all the way on up to some of your more complicated projects. So I'm all about process, and I'm all about theory and thinking critically. That's why I don't like being called makers or people calling one another makers. That culture is looking for a tutorial.
Well, you know what? And
How do I build a
people
Baby Yoda?
Like don't associate themselves with the movements that they're in. Like there's a lot of pop artists that don't consider themselves pop artists. You know, it's one of those things. You don't necessarily get to name the movement or what you do as much as you'd like to.
Right.
But yeah, I guess what we'll just call this is the order of operations, right?
Yeah, it's so important. And like you said, simple several times when you talked about that mechanism that you showed everyone. Mm-hmm. It is very simple. And like you said, your process is very simple in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
But you already know how much more complex those things are than what most of the people watching the video would construct.
Yeah.
And so that's a tiny scale. And then you take that little thing and you put it on the overall scale, and it's still like 1/10 of how complex things can
be. And also, like you're saying, with the order of operations, it's about everything is built off of something else. Okay. Mm-hmm. Whereas even people maybe looking at this maybe seem very complex, but really it is just the mouth is a lever, you know, the mouth is just a lever. There's nothing.
But you don't start there. You know what I mean?
Well, not only in a way, I kind of did. I kind of do start there a little bit.
But well, you'll fill in blanks. That's the tricky part. It's hard. Like anybody, think of any of you, think of anything that you know how to do well or are practiced at doing.
Yeah.
Actively thinking about where to start teaching someone who has never done it before is a hard thing. So yes, you probably jumped in there, and a lot of us, when we draw, we jump in drawing different things because we're filling in blanks already. We have experience. But yeah, you wouldn't start there for that. You'd start with, I need to hold it in my hand like this, and it needs to go up from here. That's something I know. And at some point it needs to stop because that'll be high enough. And then there'll be a shape there that has to do with the character itself. And the wings are going to go out, to the sides, and not to the front and the back, but to the sides. It's very general, but you have to start there. You can't.
Sure. And also part of what I said, why I was phrasing it that way, is part from something that rings in my head that I learned from you years ago, is because I was one of those people that was fascinated at first too with animatronics. So I know how to make a puppet, a mechanical puppet like this, but how do I make it animatronic? And you're like, well, it's the same thing. You make it move the way you want it to move, and then you just add an actuator. And this time, in this case, the actuator is, the lever and the trigger here, but on something like the Minotaur that you did, that has servos instead, and it's just really about making it move the way you want to first. That's kind of why I meant it. Said that because the first thing I did is made this mouth move the way I wanted, and then I added just a way to control it rather than moving it here with my hand. Okay, I'll tie a little string there and go all the way down the neck. Right. Well, I'll get more into some of these actual materials and stuff that I use and recommendations on how to find that stuff and where to learn more about that process. But first, I wanted to, because we were kind of talking about this before, and I thought you had a really great example of how we want to go through that order of operations right now. So if Chaz Vance was going to make a basic eye blink of a puppet, exactly where might you start?
Well, like we were talking, like you said earlier today, you're working around an eyeball. And so you need to pick the size of the eyeball. And to pick the size of the eyeball, you need to know how big the character is basically going to be. So we were talking about using, Baby Yoda as an example. Oftentimes in class, when we were in school, one of the first places that you start is in 2D. You're going to either draw, or you're going to get a Xerox copy or print a photograph to the right scale. So he's got a head, he's got two eyes, he's got ears. And whether this is a photograph you print off the internet, his mouth is here. And you may not in the photograph see a neck or something. It may be obscured by the chin, but I end up adding with lines, if I didn't draw it from scratch, right into a photograph, just a black and white garbage kind of draft copy. I'll add what's going on, behind the scenes. If the ear is connected back here or something like that, I'll get that in there, and because I can understand that it's 3D, and I'll have it in front of me at the scale that I want it to be. And then I can literally measure roughly the diameter of the eye. And if you're in engineering or planning for industry or something, we have to get way more complicated than this. But one of the nice things about fabric and foam and hobby projects and entertainment projects is the tolerances and stuff can be really massaged and loose. So we get him all out here as big as we'd like him to be. And some of you have seen on your page and stuff where I'm an administrator, people ask about scale. If your hand's involved, if your hand runs the mouth, but you can get your hand right on the paper, and you can start with what kind of room you need inside of the head or something like that. So that helps me, depending on the type of puppet, understand how big it needs to be. You wanted, I think, Baby Yoda to look correct at scale with human beings. So you had to do some measuring on a picture of like a person, and you get somebody in the picture, and you get Baby Yoda in the picture, and you get a sense of, well, if he's that tall, his head should be that big, then based on a 6-foot person. Then we can get down to what we've got here using that. It's a process working to how to get a picture of him on the paper at the right scale to build him. Then we can measure the eyeballs. Then we can pick out the eye form that we would use. And I have a bunch here. I think people have seen you and that mold that you copied from a mold that I have, that has a variety of eyeballs. That's the Minotaur. That's one of the extras that we had. A variety of different sizes, some of which have irises 3-dimensionally in there. There's the roller from a deodorant, but you got to get to a point where I erased him, but you got to find out what you have too. That's another place that you can leverage the low tolerance.
Yeah.
You don't have to make something just a touch bigger than what you've already got. If it looks like it's close enough, you may be able to massage that or vacuum form it and add a couple layers to it and make it.
That's a good point. That is exactly what I did too. Though I did kind of make it to scale best I could based on images with other people in there, and assumed the person's height was 6 feet to make that a nice round number. But the first thing I did is I found the size of eyes that I made, and then scaled within reason to my other proportions, everything else to that.
Sure. So, that'll save you a ton of work, because and I never want to discourage anybody from going the extra mile, but if you don't have the eye size that you want, you can start with getting the eye size that you need or that you want by either making it or finding it. If you have something close and you can live with it, if it's not important to the project that you get it perfect today, maybe that's a better idea. But to start with, you need to decide whether your eyeball is going to look up, down, left, right. So this is like one of the more complicated eyeball mechanisms called a gimbal, and you can see him. I'm going to have a really hard time showing this. I'm going to need to
hold it up or down by the camera.
Yeah, I'll hold it to the webcam, but you can see that. Have you got that one? Let's see here. You can see in the back of the eyeball here.
Yeah.
There's so much. It looks like so much is going on, and that's because this character, his eyes are all over the place. But his eyeball could look up and down, left and right, and his eyelids blink.
Top and bottom. Yeah.
Right. You got a top and a bottom, which they move together, but still. So if we come back to my sketchbook here, or whatever you want to call this, let's see here. So much information to go over, but it's a really complicated eyeball, because from the side, if this is the eyeball that you chose, you're going to need more than half. You're going to need about 2/3 of it. So you end up with a flat back, however that you come by such a thing. And this gets into machining, which I know you're starting to get into. But you need to come up with a way to create a cavity that goes by the center line of the circle. Was here.
Wait, is this a top view or side view?
From the side.
Okay.
In fact, it wouldn't matter. I suppose we could make it from the top or from the side at this point. So your pupil or whatever would be out here. So you end up with this shape. Looks like this guy, right? He's got this is essentially what we're looking at here, right? So he's got a hollow cavity in there. Then you can make a sleeve, which would just be a section of circular material, and he's as long as this. He fits down in there. He's the right diameter to fit inside of this. And again, if you have something that's going to make a great sleeve, and you can measure the outside of it, and you're going to be able to drill into the back of your eyeball that size, well, that's maybe the way to go. You can work with what it is that you've got. But again, this is a really high-level eyeball design, which we probably shouldn't have started with. However, you put a sleeve in there, and then you can drill a hole through the straight on through right on the center. So you have a hole going right through that sleeve in here. And then I put a brass rod cut to the length in that sleeve. So if you were to slide that out, the rod would come right out the end of it, and you'd have the 3 pieces in your hand. You put the rod back in there, you slide him back in, and now you have a freewheeling eyeball on a little rod. If you can imagine reaching inside to grab that rod, it'd be on the half.
Yeah, right in that center point.
On the center, which is so important. And then when you hold it, you could go side. The smaller you can hold it inside here, the more side to side you can go. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can hold it with a clevis, which is a little piece of hardware that looks like this, He's got a pin that goes through him like that. If you put that through the rod, that can go up and down on the rod, and on the rod it's so like this, the eyeball can look up and down, and it can turn side to side. So now I have all those degrees of freedom, and it just is rolling all around. There's no servo attached, there's no push rod, there's no cable. It's just a situation where I've created an eyeball that can
a
be finished.
universal joint. Is that what they would call it?
Right. Basically building a universal joint. But there's no hardware. I don't need to screw anything together. I don't need to glue anything together. It's a section of a circular material with a hole drilled.
Material there is pressure fit in.
Essentially, yeah. You can also glue it in if you wanted. Yeah. I like to pressure fit because I needed to take it, come and go, take it off, put it back, depending on what was going on. But it's just a loose piece of rod that fits end to end in there perfectly. This size fits into this opening perfectly. There's a hole through the side of this rod shown here. And the little clevis, I don't have one. Where is he? I set that thing down. Here it is. Clevis is a piece of hardware that you can get at the model airplane or the RC car store. You start getting into, this is a clevis here. You can see it on the end there. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Get out of the way. There. If this would flip down, there we go. This is a little clevis right here.
How do you spell that for people?
Clevis.
Okay, so if people want to Google that, and
right. But that's the type of thing that you could make from scratch, but there's no reason to. And that'll get you to the place where you're holding an eyeball that can look side to side and up and down at any time. But it's far too complicated for this.
So then kind of take it to the style that would be for this baby Yoda. So his eyes couldn't move, couldn't look in any direction, and it actually didn't need to, because that character's eyes are just essentially flat black.
Right.
The alien-like look.
So one of the simplest things that you can do, and again, we got onto a subject prior to this that we probably had no business being on. Trying to organize my thoughts here. Basically, the simplest eye that you can create has no pupil.
Yeah.
From the side, you can put an eyelid on it and attach it right to the eyeball. For example, if you had a ball, where'd that little
so this is for
deodorant ball,
an alien that has full black eyes, where you wouldn't see the rotation.
Anything that doesn't have an iris, correct, no iris, no pupil, which when you move the eyeball and a dot moves around, it seems like it's looking up, down, left, right. But the minute that it's a perfect glossy black or some other sort of perfect surface color, you don't necessarily appreciate. This has even got smudges on it, so you can kind of see that it's turning, but you can't see that the surface is really rotating that well. So what you do is you put the eyelid right on top of the eyeball as part of it. This isn't working here. This is the hole. You sculpt it on there with epoxy clay or something like that, and when it revolves around the opening, if you have a hole in the just like a message on my phone that's right on top of what my feed is. Anyway, you've got the eyeball hole that you're looking out through, but this rotates and it appears to blink and open, and all you're doing is turning this eyeball at the back, and it appears to close the lid and open the lid, and you never notice that the whole surface of the eyeball is going by, oftentimes, unless you get really close. For example, that's how the little baby Yoda puppet that you have works.
Well,
which is one of the easiest things to do.
That's not how mine actually works. But I could have definitely done it that way, and it would have worked for this design. But one place that I can think of off of my top of my head that has their puppet kind of like that, if you look at Scooby-Doo, actually did this live action puppet version. I think there was only a couple episodes, but if you look at the Velma character, her big glasses, and then the little pupils are those little black dots, and then to make her blink, that's exactly what it is. So the whole thing rotates, and on the back of it, it was white that matched the glasses. so that it had that exact same type of thing. And that was a
Ah,
Jim Krupa puppet, which is where I've learned a lot of the mechanical design stuff that I
right.
personally do. Yeah.
So that is, I don't want to call it a bastardization, but that is leveraging a simple concept to the max. It's almost
Yeah.
trick. It's almost, it's
And
again very simple, but
that's the magic of
such a
puppetry.
commanding idea.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah,
that?
that's kind of the magic of puppetry is so often a lot of these things are a simple practical effect that are just filmed in a way to make it look more complex than it really is.
Yeah, well, the star isn't the complexity; it's the elegance that you want. It's the simplicity is elegance. That's what's so exciting about the simplicity is that it's elegant. He's supposed to a puppet a lot of times, especially Muppet stuff, is like a live action cartoon. So
Yeah.
things that you can draw like black dot on a white eye and the things that cartoons can do because they are drawn. I see in puppetry they want to leverage what you can get out of cartoons as much as possible in real life. And then you end up making something kind of mechanically complicated so that it'll do it. Because cartoons are infinitely flexible. That's why that medium works so well for some things, not for others. So I feel like we're in the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, we are in the weeds.
When it comes to mechanical,
go to another design that you were showing me before. I thought you were doing a really good example of it as well with doing like a hand mechanism for a puppet.
Yeah, we can do that. But like I said, I would rather teach. You got to have a theoretical understanding. Again, we're just throwing things at people. Check this out. It's just incredible. There's people commenting about how somebody was so smart. I wish I was that smart. That's the kind of thing that doing this will make you feel if you haven't done it before, because you're not. I'm not accusing anybody of not thinking critically. I say one can struggle to think critically if you're just given stuff in a finished.
Yeah. Well, again, that's why
this is a train wreck.
Anyway, you're showing it really in a way that it shows a process of your thinking about doing it, and then the order of operations, which is kind of like what we were talking about. How even in that hand mechanism that you were showing me before, that you were drawing, how where you would start with it, like you'd start with the leather,
right,
and then go with the foam.
So,
I think that would be a good thing to.
We got to start. We got to back way up.
Back up.
Mechanical design for creatures and organic things has to be based on the way creatures and organic things are built, which is your skeleton and your muscles. So when you're building a mechanical mechanism, first you have to have the components, the skeletal components, and then you can put the muscles like the servo or the cable or whatever it is that you're going to use to make it move would come later. So when we build a human being, we got to have a skeleton first that's going to work with the muscles that we plan to put on top of it. So in any eyeball, like we talked about before, far too complicated of a mechanism. However, first I had to have an eyeball held by the back with such a small footprint so that it could look left and right, up and down. And outside of that, I had eyelids that could open and close, like I showed you via my hands. I had construct that situation before I want to say before I considered it all, how I would make it move. That's one of those things that, again, once you've done it one time, you'll design for how you plan to make something move. But for anybody learning to do this, first you're going to make the mechanical system, and it's going to have constraints, and it's going to have degrees of freedom. If you've done any 3D modeling, which is another thing that not often is popular in this sort of area with people, but that's how you put pieces together in the computer, is to constrain them and to leave them with degrees of freedom. My finger has constraints. Theoretically, we can bend these rules a little bit, but it really doesn't bend backwards. It's constrained to start at this, it has to be straight, or it can be closed up basically on itself like that. Those are the only ways in which it really has degrees of freedom of itself. Of course, we could talk about on my hand, I can do that back and forth, at this location, but talking just about my finger, it's either straight, or it can be curled around like that, or straightened back out again. And side to side, you really don't get anything out of it. So you got to build yourself something for the fingers that you want to build. You got to build something that can only move in that way, unless you're making some kind of wacky fingers that go upside down and backwards. We're going to stick to conventional thinking for right now. So to execute something like that, I was talking before, I want to have we got to talk about front, side, and top. So we're going to look at it from the top, typical mechanical drawing layout. Then we're going to look at this thing from the side. It's thin.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to look at it from the end here. And in a 3/4 view, we'll look at it here. What is it? It's probably a strip of leather. And that's because I've got to have something that works like a finger does and can bend, but I don't want to build a little hinge joint here and a little hinge joint here. That's far too complicated for a very simple finger puppet, or a finger for a Muppet style puppet. So I might think about webbing. That's something that can bend like this and doesn't really go side to side, but it collapses under its own weight pretty easily. It doesn't. It's so infinitely flexible. I can curl that, right around almost too much. So like I was thinking, I think leather would make more of an understandable density for people who are following. Something that we've all felt like your belt. We get a sense of it. Want just hang out in space. It can be curled, but it's hard to crease it. You wouldn't want to fold it like that. So that'll work good here. And then underneath, we can put some L200 foam, which hopefully everybody else is familiar with. Across the bottom, you wouldn't see it from the top view. And then the end, it would be underneath like this. So now on the bottom, we're looking at the side profile of what we'd like to make out of a finger. We've got the top of it here, and we're looking at, the end of it over here. And so it's not really finger-like yet, so I might contour it to look, more like that. You could certainly make something that grows a little larger in this way. And from above, you could obviously round it so it looks more like your finger. And I would shape these together. So we're going to start right in with order of operations. You wouldn't put this shape and this shape on these two items and then marry them together. First, like we started here with the drawing, we'd put the foam block on the leather block, and then we'd start to shape everybody together, and we get into sort of something that's reminiscent of a finger, maybe from above. And of course, you can't make it larger, but you can cut it this way to begin with, or cut some off the sides. But maybe above, we're looking for more of a finger shape too. So we get ourselves started with something like that. And that's going to work. The leather working kind of like the bones in our finger, which are kind of toward the top. And then we've all got this kind of flesh below, which is where we're going to we're going to rely on the foam. And we can see that that smushes all up when we close our finger. But this distance and this distance and this distance remain the same. And it's the underside that smushes all together. So we've got the leather on top and the foam on the bottom. And so to make that fold up, we could pick our joints in a finger. We got the end here. We got 1, 2. Joint, 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 joint. And from there, we can take and dart that foam with a razor blade just to the leather. Don't cut the leather. And then all of a sudden, you have something that's remarkably finger-like. You have something that'll do this and then open back up again. And from the top, it really doesn't want to go side to side. And it has the space to close up. And depending on the size and stuff that you built, it's got a nice end on the, the back of it. Here, this is what we've got going on here. It's kind of round. Comes around. We've taken some material out there. We've taken some material out there. And that's kind of what we've got going. And that'll move and behave kind of like a finger does, and really won't do much of what a finger, won't do already. And that's huge. How do we get it to move like that? If you take a cable and go through this piece of foam and through this piece of foam and into this piece of foam and anchor it there, and you hold this thing and you pull that cable, this finger's going to curl up on you. It's going to go because it's taken the end, and it can close these gaps as the cable grows shorter to a certain point. And you're going to run into physical problems at that point that we can talk about afterwards. So we knew what we wanted. We worked down to a point where we wanted something like this. And then if it were me to be wise again and work in the proper order, before I had cut these out, I'd heat up a long nail or something with a propane torch or whatever, working outside where the fumes weren't going to smoke me out of my house. But you can melt down in here quickly with a hot wire. Just poke it in straight. Get an idea of how far in you want to go so it doesn't come ripping out the front of the finger. So get an overall length. Maybe make a mark on the rod with a pen or a marker, and just go straight in and straight back out. And then when you cut this, you've got a hole that's still aligned through all of those pieces that you can route that cable through, and then fill this up with glue, and the cable will stay stuck in there. So these are the types of things that you want to do in the right order. But that's a relatively simple finger. You can make 4 of them, different sizes and shapes, and you could put a thumb, and you could start them all on a hand. And then when you pull all those cables together, you'll get something that happens kind of like that. And that's very, very basic stuff, but it's based on how your finger is actually constructed, which is a huge help.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I think it inspires me to want to start making some hands myself right now. So that'll probably be something fun I start playing with a little bit too. I think it's a lot of really good advice, especially like you said, for how you're thinking things. 'Cause I think a lot of people might cut those like 3 separate foam pieces first and then drill holes in each of them. And then when they pull that string, it might not line up perfectly. So I like going back to that original topic of like the order of which you do things. But the reality is, again, that's what's so nice about you for the way you are pretty meticulous with how you design things ahead of time. Whereas a lot of that I would have kind of tried to design in my head and then just kind of go for it and found out those mistakes, which is why I tend to do probably more prototyping like this. Like I said, this is not going to be a puppet. This is just something I did to test my mechanical goals that I had with this puppet, and then I'm going to redo it and simplify it because I had to make compromises to make things work the way I needed them to because of not thinking as far ahead as I should have as I was doing it.
Right.
So the final design is going to be a little bit more streamlined than this, even though this works. This was another thing is too. That's why I do like working this way as well, because I take something like this then, since this is not going to be a finished puppet, and I put it on a shelf or a drawer. So anytime I want to make something similar, I can just kind of grab it and see how it works. Like, oh yeah, that's why I did this, but I remember that didn't quite work out. Oh, but maybe it does work better for this new project. Because another thing is too, people ask, well, how do you do this? Well, how do you do that? How do you do this? Here's the thing. These wings, that is also like an eyebrow mech. It would work the exact same way. Because another thing, I guess more so for me personally, the way I do mechanical designs, or I should say mechanical designs I use, I have like 5 designs that I just milk and use in a whole bunch of different ways. Right. Is that something that you try to do in your work?
Well, that's like I said, there's such a not to scare anybody away, but you'll find that like simple machines, everybody's heard of the inclined plane and the lever, and you'll find that the world milks of a small variety of concepts too. And that's what's so difficult. There's kind of an element of hubris to being a creative person who's like to draw and sew and glue things together and sculpt and work totally free form all the time. But then is highly interested and motivated in building mechanical systems for their constructions. There is so much to research and understand before. If you've never like worked on a small engine before, fixed any odd mechanical thing around the house, if you've never worked with any mechanical systems or seen anything, you are so behind. But therefore, that's the place that you could start, is take things apart, try and fix things yourself, experience all these simple machines. And the more of them that you see, it seems like a wide variety. But then, like you're saying, after a while, almost like putting together the periodic table, well, that's just another lever. That's just another lever application. It's constantly, that's just another cam application. Just more cam, like all the different ways that you could build a cam, you'll just see them over and over and over again. And it'll round out your understanding of the concept to see what a wide variety of ways it can be used and how many different things that it can cause and affect. You follow that Instagram, CAD GIFs or something?
Oh yeah, I love it. Yeah, again, yeah. I don't think I'll ever have an example where I use an exact thing from that Instagram. However, I just use it for inspiration. That's something I wanted to show here too. I have a couple books here that I never copied, not even copied in a negative way. I've never like used the exact mechanism before. I just use it as an inspiration a lot of times. This is a book that I like. It's not a puppetry book, but it's called 507 Mechanical Movements. And for someone like me who didn't grow up like working on cars or fixing things like that, though I was definitely a tinkerer, but it was more with like paper clips and rubber bands, which is all you need to make a simple mechanism to practice. But again, let me switch the angle here so people can get a look. But in this book, it's not really again, stuff that you would use necessarily exactly for puppetry, but I use it. I mean, it has all these different mechanical movements to just get my head thinking. Like, oh,
Mhm.
I wonder if that's something I could, kind of retrofit or make my own version of for certain puppet movement. Or even if I don't even have an idea for a puppet movement yet, I might use that as the main, the main, as my creative juice, my creative energy to get me started in something.
Right. It could be an exciting movement that you see that you could build a character or something around or a performance around it. It works in every different direction depending on the person. There's just major facets. There's experiencing mechanical things in some way, shape, or form, or the more ways, shapes, and forms you can experience in them in, the better. There's materials and processes. You could draw out everything, dimension it all out, figure it all out, and it would work. But a huge component is, what are you going to make it out of? The wise person like you try to be, and so many other people have tried to be through you and others online with makers, is going to the big box store and inventorying and understanding what they have there that's available, so that you haven't got to reinvent the wheel and go find specific stuff. I obviously use MSC and McMaster-Carr and have to special order and find things, but 90% of what I do, people enjoy because they recognize, oh, that's just a part for this and that's just a part for that. And I designed it to work with that because it's so easy then. Or I keep a lot of that stuff around the shop, because it just makes sense. So understanding what self-lubricating plastics do, why you would use brass, what can be welded, what can be brazed, what methacrylate acrylic or methacrylate glue is, that Minotaur, all that stuff inside the head is attached with dental acrylic. And why, what is that about? But if you don't experience all these materials and processes, you're not going to be able to leverage them. It's a huge pool to jump in with 2 feet if you're not willing to do, like I often describe things this way: build a periodic table of understanding in your head. If you know anything about the periodic table, we knew of enough elements to rough it in, but so much of it has come to light and all the blanks have filled in naturally. And that's sort of how I describe my understanding of stuff. What I do is I have this big grid, and welding's over here, like the noble gases, and right along it is brazing and soldering, obviously. And things are kind of grouped in a way that makes sense. And sometimes it's not as literal as like whether or not there's a space there or not, but I'll learn of some new technology or process, or I'll see somebody do something, and boop, 2 little things I understood completely or have done will spread out. And obviously this thing is a marriage of the 2, and it apparently belongs right alongside. And again, it's not real literal. Someday I may lay it out. It may make a cool vector art or something, but that's more like the way that I store this information. I go through Home Depot even, and it's like, well, conduit and PEX and black pipe, and these are all cylindrical tubes. Some have a thicker wall, some have a narrow, some can be welded, some can be glued, some you can't, this or that. But that's a full inventory in my brain now for the next time I need to execute something. I kind of can go in there and dig around. But
that's the nature of what we do too. So almost nothing that we actually use was made for how we're using it. Like a lot of my friends over at Swazzle, they say all the time, there isn't really a puppet store where you get the puppet parts. Really. Not
and any of the questions that we get, how do you do this or how do you do that? It's always theoretical, because again, if you're trying to build a biological system, if you're trying to replicate a biological system in any way, I really hope you've got great research on that biological system, that you've looked over videos of it functioning, or you have an animal that you have watched, you've got photography, you've seen some sculpture people have done, or found other mechanical projects that move that way, or thought about the anatomy that you're trying to replicate. That's a huge part of it.
And I mean, and I don't necessarily think we should get into this, but a whole nother part of that too is, how is it going to be used? Does it have to? How much weight does it have to be able to hold too, and things like that? Is it made for a 2-hour shoot, or is it made for a TV show that's going to be running for 7 years?
Right.
Those are all things that you take into account for the types of materials you're going to use, and on top of that, so that's just another factor you have to take in, because they have to they have to work a certain way, and then they may have to last and have a certain amount of durability depending on the project. Now, I think in general, most people want things to last as long as they can, but you know what? In the professional world, that's not really even how it works.
You
If
might
it
be
feels-
surprised with how short things last too. You
oh
may think you
yeah,
really built something nice, and it just if you don't have a. I continue to gain more and more experience, but I remember earlier in my career, and even today, I'll think I've got something wildly over-engineered, and it'll take a dump almost immediately.
yeah.
And everything in between. I see Giovanni's in the comment section. I went out to his studio to build that giant chattering teeth. It's like what you are waiting in line when you're waiting in line at a theme park. I think it's kind of going next to you. It's the classic chatter teeth, you know what I mean, that just clack together constantly, but it's like a big size, and it was styrofoam sculpted, and he polyurea coated it, so it was like a hard polyester or a polyurea shell, hard plastic shell on this sculpt, and he had the top and the bottom palette, and it was supposed to just sit there and chatter indefinitely forever. And so the mechanism design is across the board. You always want to keep things as simple as possible, but it was very simple. I could draw it here. It's a choo-choo train kind of a thing. If this is the lower palette and you got all your teeth in here from the side, and we had this other piece that had all these teeth, in this way, and I think it was on some kind of a base. Who knows what it is? But the idea was that it opened and closed indefinitely. You've got to have, like I was talking before, constraints and degrees of freedom. A hinge. If we're doing this, there's a hinge, going through this particular space. It's just the sort of joint that you wouldn't put a ball and socket there. You wouldn't put a universal joint there. I understand that I want this to appear like a mouth. You draws, in simple terms, a hinge. Had to have some kind of hinge there, so we bought some pillow block bearings, and we put them through at the back, and we made it first so that it would hinge. And then ultra simple, once again, how to make it go up and down indefinitely. Again, like a choo-choo train. We had a motor down here, and we put an arm on a wheel to a location up here. Across, we have so many hurdles here for some people because they haven't seen mechanical drawings or whatever, but across here would represent the end of any axle as you look at it from the end. So we had an axle in there. We had an axle there, basically. This wheel goes round and round, and as it goes round and round, that rod angle changes because it's riding around that wheel at the bottom, but it's constantly affecting that open and close situation. And at the lowest point, the teeth didn't touch. I set it up like that with, I think, a block of wood in between the jaws, and I built all this linkage. And I had the rod down here at the bottom. So when it was closed like that, at the lowest possible setting, the teeth would never slam together. And so then based on the wheel and how far we get from the location that the rod's attached to the center of the wheel, we can make the wheel larger or smaller. We end up not needing a wheel. You can just have what's called a horn. You don't need the rest of the wheel. It's pointless. You just need to get from the center of the motor rotation out to where you've attached the arm. So you end up with what basically amounts to a servo horn. And how far we wanted that apart would be how far the jaw opened. You could make it so large that it would backswing and then close down to a certain point. But you have, for every, it's going around and around. So as far open as it goes, that much more closed it goes.
And I also like the idea of turning a spinning motion into.
It's very easy.
What was that?
It's an easy thing. It will live a long time. It's the type of thing that's very smooth. You buy a motor that has the right power. It has bearings inside of it. It's designed to run indefinitely. You spec out a piece of equipment that's going to run indefinitely, and you put something simple on there, and it will work indefinitely. You could add 7. You could make a Rube Goldberg machine and put a linear actuator on, that to go straight up and down. It's noisy or air and stuff. You could get infinitely more complicated, but the wheel smoothly rolling and never speeding up or slowing down and going around and around and around is such a timeless.
Oh yeah,
that's how your engine works.
The point I was making too is that a lot of people don't realize how to transfer the energy, how to take something from a motor that's spinning and turn it into this type of emotion instead of something that, like, obviously you'd use for a car or something to propel something like that. So, and I use that exact same method. If you remember, I have it on YouTube. My Phantom of the Opera monkey that. The cymbals crash, same thing. I got a servo that spun. A lot of servos go back and forth. This was a servo that just spun indefinitely.
You can hack them, yeah.
Yeah, you can hack them. And that's what it did. Is it just spun and it just made the arms go like this because I set it up just like that. Now, at this point, though, we're getting close to our hour. So what I wanted to do is I'm going to change that. So, guys, if you want to start putting your questions down in the comments, if you have any specific questions about any mechanism advice, I have my own questions for Chaz I'm going to get to in a moment. But one quick thing first before we get over to Chaz, and while you guys are dropping your questions down in the comments, I wanted to just show you guys a book recommendation or two, another book recommendation or two that I have for you guys. Okay. So I already mentioned this one here, the 507 Mechanical Movements. Again, this isn't a puppetry book, but it's just something it was a very, very inexpensive book that I just like to keep on my shelf for inspiration. Okay. Another one is it's actually a ventriloquist figure making book. Okay. And what I like about this is because, it's kind of the opposite of this. And this is very engineering minded. And this is a little bit more, the novice type of stuff where you're using stuff from the hardware store and retrofitting stuff. But what I like about it is even though I don't formally build vent figures, a lot of the mechanical designs are the stuff that Chaz and me we're just talking about, These are the types of things that are set inside of the head, whether it's a hard figure or a soft figure. So that's a looking back and forth mechanism. Okay, and I'll give you the title of this one again. Again, they show how you can set it in, how it can be recentering if you want it. This is a mechanism for eyebrows, I think it is, this one here. Yeah, so there's eyebrow holes. There's all types of different things. I would highly recommend this book. I believe I got it on Amazon. A lot of great advice, even some more interesting thing like a tongue mechanism. Again, this is for hard cast characters, wooden characters, but they can definitely be applied to any type of character at all. And this is called Figure Making Can Be Fun. Okay?
That's an important thing. You want to look through everything that you're looking at and look for the theory of it and think critically about what it is and why it's working. If you can understand visually why it's working. So many people go looking for a tutorial or to be told how to accomplish what it is they're trying to accomplish. And you'll find people that'll tell you, or you'll find tutorials where people show you. But really, you're asking a lot of somebody to figure out your problem for you from start to finish. There just simply isn't, a certain way of doing it. It's going to be a theory that you execute for yourself based on what you have the skills, what materials you have, how much time you've got,
Yeah. I've got one more quick book recommendation. Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Oh, the last book. So again, this one's very cheap, not for puppets, but it'll give you inspiration. This one isn't too bad, I think, for price range. I have no idea what it was, but if I bought it, I'm sure it wasn't ridiculously expensive. The last one is a very, very expensive book. This is called Figures in the Fourth Dimension by Ellen Rixford, and she is an amazing woman. I met her at the Puppeteers of America Festival when it was at, I think, was it Swarthmore? No, I think when it was in Yukon, and she actually, I don't even know if she's a puppeteer herself, but what she did is she went around and interviewed some of the biggest puppet builders that do mechanical movement puppets and automata, and this is like a little bit almost like a dictionary, not a dictionary. It just has all these examples of different makers of automata and puppets, all different styles of puppetry. There's marionettes. I believe Philip Huber is in here. All types of amazing stuff. But also one of my mentors in mechanism building, Jim Krupa, has a section in here. Okay. And you'll recognize some of these materials and movements, and he has got some stuff in here about some of his eyes that he's done. And this was actually a project that he did back at the O'Neill. Oh, not that one, but that's also another. Again, this is a very complex mechanized puppet that he built with eyebrows and blinking top and bottom all over using these same principles. It's this one here. This was a project that he did at the O'Neill with one of his classes. Now, I didn't take that class, but Cameron Garrity, my co-host for the Puppeteers podcast, did, and he let me borrow the one he put together. But this was the project that they ended up doing, and it had a mouth mechanism and a little eyebrow mech with a little slave mechanism there, so it was only one movement. But you can see a lot of the stuff in that book. I believe I think it's her website. If you type in Ellen Rixford and Figures of the Fourth Dimension into Google, it will come up. And I believe, I could be wrong, I want to say it's figuresofthefourthdimension.com for information on that. So again, if you have any questions, drop them into the comments right now so we can take a look at them. But the first question I have for you off the bat, though, Chaz, is what type of advice might you give to somebody who is an absolute beginner, where to start, and maybe they don't have that kind of mechanical background, but they want to start playing with things? Like, look at if you had a neighbor that came by and said, "Hey, you know what? I want to start playing around with this. Where should I start?"
Completely outside of thing. I mean, if you already have a puppet and you want to make eyes or something else, I mean, you have a hand puppet like the type that I see, your audience generally has their hand in the head running the mouth. If you have a puppet like that, you need to start by creating something inside the head, like a skull or a plate or a surface of some kind, even if it's directly on top of your hand. You got to find something in there. You already have a mouth plate. A lot of times you could build a mouth plate that's underneath. Can't show this. We have some technical difficulties here. We're going to have to remediate. I can't work under these conditions. Anyway, you have your mouth plate, but then you can come out and around and go over the top of your hand and back. Now you've got a loop or a surface, however you construct this, whether it's all one piece or it's 75 different separate pieces to do it. Now you have a surface above your fingers up and out of the way upon which you can make anatomical situations and features like eyeballs and things like that relative to the puppet. They're going to go everywhere you go, just as your eyes go everywhere that your head goes. So if you're somebody who's, like we're talking about your question, a beginner that has a puppet, you can't be building anything inside of foam and fabric. You should have realized that already. You've got to give yourself purchase or context for the mechanical system that's inside, again, based on real life. Your eyeballs go with your head. Our jaw, I was going to use this boy.
Oh, yeah, look at that guy.
You've got a head.
Is it real?
Yes, this is real. You've got, I'm going to let those fall. You've got your skull, which has your upper mandible on there, the top of your teeth. And this is where your hand, your hand's inside this guy.
Yeah.
And this is all theoretical again, but this is what you've got on top of your hand when you've got a puppet of any kind. You've got a cranium and an upper mandible with the eyeballs, and notice they go everywhere with the top of your hand. So that's why I say you build up and off of the top of the mouth plate over top of your hand, and you can build on that and take everybody with you. And the jaw is a part down here. But anybody trying to build eyeballs or anything into a puppet like that needs to come up with some way to attach that system to the top of their hand and have everything covered, together along with it. Too many people build this item, this mechanical eyeball system or a pseudo mechanical eyeball system, and then they've got a foam shell of a puppet, and then they want to put it in here and then lever on it with their fingers or run it with motors or cables. And it's like, well, that doesn't work because you have to have context. Your engine, the whole duct of your engine will work.
And trying to jump. You need to be able to push off the floor. And that's essentially what your mechanism needs to be able to do.
Back to that finger that would do this if you pulled that cable. If you pull the cable and it's not relative to anything, if you pull the cable back here to do that and it's not relative to anything, it just goes with.
Yeah, it just goes with
everything. Just leaves.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People ask all the time. That's why there's this housing. That's why it's not just a string hanging. There has to be that housing on there, so it has something to push off of. To
at
move
the end, right above your hand. Notice the housing stops at that big thick white plate, and the cable's drawn beyond the end of the housing, and that causes, and it's the same thing up in the head. The housing is a finite, like on your bicycle. This is how your bike cables work. Again, understanding how simple things that everybody takes for granted work. The cable on a bike goes from where's my camera here? It goes from the brake lever to down by the bike's brake, the cable, and it's held there fast, and it's of a certain length, and it doesn't move based on the frame. And when you pull the cable out one end with the lever, it pulls the cable in the other end down by the bike's brake, etc. Understanding why that works like that is a huge step in understanding how to build a cable system for a puppet.
Absolutely, yeah. And a little bit more advice I'll give too to someone who just wants to start tinkering. Even if you don't have a design in mind or something, like that's what cardboard and hot glue is for. It was one thing. It was a little bit of rant that we went on in the first episode about not to use those things if you're trying to do professional work. However, it is perfect for experimenting and prototyping and
Yeah.
seeing how things move. If you want to make it, if you're going to make a mistake, you want to make it there first, either in your drawing, like what Chaz has been sharing us with his process, or if you're going to be again playing with movements in that way, that's the place to do it. And
Right.
one more thing too that I'll say is really wonderful of a strength that for Chaz is the fact that he goes through this design process. Is if you want to work professionally, that's the way the world works.
Right.
If a client asks you to create some sort of character or something, they're not just going to let you say, "Oh well, I have some materials. Let me just come up with something." No, they're going to want to see a sketch first. They're going to want to see a design. They're going to want to get a very good idea of what you're building before you start building it. And even if you have that other process where you're doing a prototype first and then showing them the prototype, a lot of times, unless you planned that and they want that and that's built into the cost, a lot of times that's sometimes something people, the artist eats that cost because it's their process, which is not the way you want to work in a professional way.
Right. It should be expected. There's just, you'll always run into people that don't understand it. But you want to be effective when you start shopping for, buying, and cutting into materials. And the only way that you're effective there is with a ton of time spent prior to that, working down to and refining what it is that you hope to achieve. Because no matter what, when you're cutting materials and buying things, you'll be making trips back to the store, you'll be making mistakes, you'll be making errors to a certain degree. And if they're on top of figuring things out too, it's you're eating your hat, and you're hemorrhaging efficiency, you're hemorrhaging money in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So playing with cardboard and tape and glue, and making that relative to your drawing. Draw a little bit. If you get to a point where I don't know if I understand this, try and build it a little ways. Then it's like, oh yeah, that wouldn't work like that. So how would that? Then you can look right at it and how would that look in a drawing? So change your drawing to suit what you've got there. Then maybe that'll allow you to go back to the drawing and do a little bit more planning. And again, you're teaching yourself. But that's what all of this is. None of us should be looking for, again, that tutorial, and it's not the realm. It's not the realm. If that's who you are and you're not willing to broaden your horizons significantly, it's not a lot of work. Within a year, even you, since I've known you, have grown in leaps and bounds. The more time you spend at it, the faster. It's like a Fibonacci curve. There will always be more to know, but like you could zoom back in indefinitely to the beginning of your career and still look at how much incredible amount of stuff you've learned and moved through. And it's always that much more to do. But
I agree. Well, this was great. I think people got a lot of great information and a bare minimum inspiration on how to either build mechanisms or adjust their process to have it more what's the word for it? Like more thought out, more planned
organization. The the bane of the right brainer's existence, it's allowed me to be more successful, is because you need organization, you need a process, you need to be methodical, you need to write down.
But I'm an artist, Chaz. I'm an artist.
Sorry, you will run into a glass ceiling is the wrong word, but you'll run into roadblocks with that mindset that you won't move past. Here's the thing about artists: most of us had aptitudes and talents that were remarkable from an early age, and we followed them naturally along everywhere that felt right and felt good, and there was a return on investment, and we got better at it. We all know some of us don't draw hands or don't draw feet, or we don't do this or we don't do that, and we've played to our strength for forever. And especially if we didn't go into a creative tertiary education or higher education at all, that's where I started seeing people leave, because for the first time all of us were being bullwhipped to listen and follow directions and go in a direction that doesn't come naturally and make yourself uncomfortable. And a lot of us, and I'm going to continue to disparage artists because I'm good enough to step up with most of you. But I had to bend in that way, and you will have to do that too. This doesn't come naturally to right brain.
I think you even said with this degree that you went, what was there, like 30 people that entered and only like 3 or 4 graduated?
I graduated with 7, and there were over 100 of us that started together. Yeah.
So I mean, and again, when you talked about why, it was because like they were making changes and things to going. If you do a design of something and then you have an idea halfway through, like, hey, you know what? If I do this to this, it's going to be even better. Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, it will. Mm-hmm. But part of what your degree was learning about that process. And you
Right.
have to be able to do that, especially because a lot of these people want to work for another company. If you want to get a job for a big studio that works on puppets or characters or creatures for movies, you can't do that. You have to follow along. You're a piece. You're a lot of times in those companies, it's not one person building the whole thing. They don't have Tommy on one project and Becky on another project. Everyone's doing a different piece. And guess what?
They got to come together.
The guy who does the eyes can't say, I thought it'd look better if they looked if they were about an inch bigger. Because now it's not going to go into Becky's skull that she made or
Right.
attached to the body that Tom made.
Right.
So
the other part of it is that we didn't want to, that they didn't really lead with, was it will make you leaps and bounds more effective.
Yes.
Your artistic ability will grow as a collateral effect from being challenged, but in every other way, you will gain efficiency and quality of work, and all of that will take your creative quality of work right on up. I mean, there's just no way to lose adhering to a process like that. It's like anything. It's basically an industrialization of creativity. So we like sap. If you get enough of it, you can boil it down and make maple syrup. That's great. And nowadays you see people have, with little tube, piped all of their trees together. They continue to refine their process to get rid of wasted time and effort and to make it highly efficient. And it's been industrialized. And that's what you can do with yourself. You can industrialize your natural aptitude and make it incredibly effective, like very potent. And that's what they wanted to do with us. I don't have a BFA. They didn't want us to explore, in every direction and reinvent art. They wanted us to be an art machine, be an art laser, point you, we got to have art there. And that was what we were supposed to be. And you can use that personally. That's what I've done working for myself, or you can go work for somebody else and you have a wheelhouse and you're a tool in their work, in their arsenal. But you have to follow through every time people expect things of you. So yeah, that's part of that discipline.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It'll make you better. It's the way to go about things. It'll make a great record of how you've grown, to have sketches of all your ideas. And that is what we had to do. We had to draw first. To pass the class, you had to come in with, and we had been checked throughout the class to have met these what do you call these milestones, whatever. The first week we had to come in with a bunch of thumbnail sketches, all the different things that we could think of that might work for this project. And then we'd pick a couple things out of there as a class, and whatever way we get down to like what really makes sense for the class here, what's a little bit too much scope, what isn't enough scope, what would be a cool character to see. That's a cool idea. People might just say, or the teacher might just say, that's a cool character. Let's push that a little further. So from 50, we'd pick 5, and the next week, rather than a big sheet of thumbnails, we'd have 5 full 8.5 by 11 sketches of those things, more realized. And then we would get critical about those, and like in maybe drawing them bigger and trying to make more detail in them. Some of them hit a wall, like this isn't worth doing, this is dumb, or it's not, for whatever reason. We'd get 1 or 2 things out of it there, and those would go to the next level and ultimately become we'd come down to one thing, then we'd sculpt that thing, and we'd sculpt it based on our sketch. And like you said, if we changed our mind or wanted to do something differently, that's fine. At some point before we come in to pass the class, you got to do a new sketch of what it is you intend to do now, given what it was that you changed. Then you do your sculpt, then you do your this, then you do that. When you sit down at the end of the class to be graded, you've got a stack of paperwork, all your little, depends on the class, but if it was a mechanical character class, you'd have all the paperwork, all the sketches you'd done, the things that moved to the next level, you'd have the final one. You may even do, some kids wanted to do a rendering. They do a color shaded version of the final thing now that it was constructed, to go in their portfolio and make it look like basically that they had basically designed and built this thing perfectly based on their design, which is disingenuous. And if you're asked, you ought to say, well, I did that after I was finished. It's still a wonderful piece of artwork. And we could look at as well the final sketch that you had before you even built it. And then your mold is sitting there too, which is a technical thing. How did we get a good casting? Let's look at the craftsmanship of the mold that you built. There are all these other facets, this whole mountain of work to showcase what you've been doing here. We're not just going to look at the video of the final thing and miss that the paint job stops at the back or anything.
It makes it look good on paper after it's done, but there's not the same value in that process. It wouldn't hold up if you had. And don't get me wrong, there were kids that came in on the skin of their teeth with a train wreck project that all the pieces were subpar essentially, but they had a final video that was like
great. The way that it moved worked well. They did a great voice or something like that. And ultimately, there were enough points attached to the final thing to drag the quality of everything up to a passing grade. There were others like myself, actually. More
Well, the goal is not to pass, though, right? It's to
right.
actually do well.
To have something for portfolio, which is what
Yeah.
we wanted. So if we didn't get to that was what I was about to say, is I would end up not necessarily having a highly polished final video. I'd have a really great project that I bit off a little bit more than I could chew. And before I graduated, I kind of put the finishing touches on and finished the project. But I passed with that again. But again, if you're not done, it's like math class. I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
if you have all the work, I can give you some points. If you haven't got the answer, but 2/3 of all the work necessary was correct, and I can see where you went wrong here, I can give you 2 out of 3 points for that math problem.
Yeah.
If you just have nothing, it's unfinished.
Yeah.
I can't help you, and that's true across the board.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Chaz, this has been great. I think we're at time now. I think people have a lot of, if you have any questions in follow up, if you're watching this on playback, please put them down in the comments. We will take a look. We will respond.
Yep.
We have another episode coming out. Hopefully, I believe it is this Thursday coming up. So keep an eye out for that. And without any further ado, if you want to check out more Chaz's work, you can check him out at Technically Magic on Instagram. He's got a Facebook page as well. I believe it's at Technically Magic. Scrolling across the bottom right there is technicallymagic.com. It's the big red background with a pineapple on it, TM. And be sure to check out his YouTube channel. It's one of my favorite things in the world. He has a YouTube channel where it's very much you get the true thoughts of Chaz Vance. And be sure to check that out. And thanks a lot for hanging out with us, guys. And we'll see you next time.